All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to uncover how private law actually serves as the ultimate framework for your personal empowerment. You know, when most of us think of the law, we instantly picture police, criminal courts, the government stepping in. But there's actually this massive, invisible web of legal power that you navigate every single day. And the crazy part? It's driven entirely by your own choices. It's called private law. Seriously, think about it for a second. Who actually decides where you live, who you marry, or who inherits your assets? By giving you the power to control your own resources and relationships without some state enforcement mechanism dictating your every move, private law is literally all about your self-determination. It's this unique legal realm where private individuals stand on equal footing, using their autonomy to exercise fundamental freedoms.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit 4 main stops. First, the divisions of private law. Second, the autonomy of will. Third, building voluntary relationships. And finally, balancing power with equality.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the divisions of private law, or as I like to call them, the arenas of power.
Before we figure out how to use our legal power, we really have to look at the specific arenas where we're actually allowed to exercise these freedoms. The law of persons literally defines how a legal person comes into being and their exact position in the eyes of the law. It's the foundational layer, right? It governs your legal beginning, your status, which basically dictates what legal actions you're actually capable of performing, and ultimately how your legal existence comes to an end. It's the who of the whole private law system. Okay, so once we have a legal person established, we look at their most intimate ties. Family law sets the rules for marriage, the consequences of that marriage, and all those critical relationships within a family structure. It's the framework that guides exactly how you relate legally to your spouse, your kids, or really anyone under your guardianship. Moving outward from the family bubble, we hit the law of patrimony. Now, this division is absolutely massive. Why? Because it covers your means, meaning your property, who inherits from you when you pass away, and your legal obligations. It basically regulates the relationships between people and their actual wealth or resources. And it breaks down into 3 distinct subcategories: property law, the law of succession, and the law of obligations.
Speaking of property law, we legally categorize the stuff you interact with every single day into 2 main groups. First, you've got movables. These are things like your car, a book, or, say, a prefabricated wooden house just sitting on the ground. Basically, things you can move without breaking them. Then you have immovables. These are fixed to the earth, like a brick house or a plot of land. And honestly, your legal rights completely change depending on which category we're talking about.
Also, within that massive law of patrimony, we find the law of obligations. So whether you sign a contract or maybe you commit a wrongful act, which the law calls a delict, that causes damage to someone else, this division governs the duties you owe. Like if you accidentally smash someone's window, that's a delict. And guess what? You now have a legal obligation to pay for those damages. You're legally bound to that other person in a relationship of performance and duty.
Moving right along to Section 2, the autonomy of will. This is really the core of private law.
So why do you actually have the power to make contracts or write wills in the first place? Well, it all comes back to this incredibly profound idea from philosopher Immanuel Kant. This interpersonal power lets legal persons organize their relationships based entirely on their own free will, like choosing who gets your house when you die. It's the recognition that your will, your own internal decision-making apparatus, is literally a law unto itself. It is deeply, deeply intrapersonal. It all starts within you.
And this concept of self-determination, that's exactly what grants you the ability to control your own life, which then gives rise to what we call subjective rights. By granting you these normative powers, the law is essentially stepping back and saying, hey, you have the ability to control resources, plan your life, and act automatically without having to ask the government for permission first.
Now check out how your normative powers connect to legal objects to create those subjective rights. For example, your power of ownership over a physical thing gives you a real right. Now this is an absolute right against the whole world. No one can just walk up and take your car. But in contrast, if you demand performance from a plumber you just hired, that's a personal right. It's only enforceable against that one specific plumber, not the entire world, right? And this architecture scales all the way up to protecting your reputation or even patenting a brand new invention.
Okay, let's shift gears to Section 3, building voluntary relationships, or the rules of engagement.
So how do we build from that intrapersonal autonomy, the stuff inside your head, to actually forming interpersonal, voluntary relationships without any external coercion? How do we engage with others? Well, the foundation here relies on a really clear progression of 3 essential variables. First up, you need consent, the freedom to decide who, when, and exactly how you engage. Second is freedom of contract. And third, good faith. Honestly, without all 3 of these working perfectly together, a private legal relationship just isn't valid.
Let's zoom in on that second step for a second. Freedom of contract means you have the absolute liberty to determine the actual content of your agreements. Think about the specifics of an antenuptial contract, or maybe a commercial lease. The state isn't standing over your shoulder telling you what rent to charge. You and the other party arrange your affairs to meet your own economic interests. It is literally positive freedom in action.
But, as they say, with great freedom comes the absolute need for trust. And that's where our third variable comes in. Good faith, which actually goes all the way back to Roman law as bona fides, acts as the ultimate mechanism to force cooperation, consistency, and honesty into your legal relations. You can't just go around tricking someone into a terrible contract and then hide behind freedom of contract. No way. You absolutely have to be loyal to your promises and sincere in how you deal with people.
Now, I should point out, this immense power isn't totally absolute. It's heavily restricted by some pretty strict guardrails, and that's to protect the broader public interest. Like, you can't use your autonomy to violate the Constitution or national policies. And if your consent was forced through duress, misrepresentation, or undue influence, yeah, that contract completely falls apart. Plus, the law steps in to limit the power of people facing insolvency, minors, or folks suffering from mental illness. And that's a good thing. It's precisely to protect them from being exploited in the private sphere.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 4, Balancing Power with Equality.
Here, we really have to examine the tension between your absolute power to choose and the absolute necessity of equality between parties. There's this super fascinating friction between formal equality, which just assumes everybody starts out on equal footing, and substantive equality, which is looking for real-world fairness. Traditionally, private law leaned heavily on formal equality, assuming 2 people signing a contract have the exact same bargaining power. But modern law? It increasingly looks at substantive equality. I mean, if a massive multinational corporation makes a contract with a single uneducated consumer, are they truly equal? Not really. Substantive equality says we have to look at real-world practice and address systemic imbalances to ensure things are actually fair.
Ultimately, the goal of all these frameworks is justice. But justice kind of fractures into different ideals depending on how deeply you consider societal context. Corrective justice might just say, hey, you broke my window, pay me for it, totally ignoring wealth or status. Relational justice looks at the fairness strictly between those 2 specific parties. But interpersonal justice, that goes way deeper, demanding actual trust, ethical behavior, and basic human dignity within those private interactions. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider a pretty provocative thought. When human autonomy and systemic, real-world realities clash, can any contract ever represent a perfectly equal balance of power? Private law gives you this incredible normative power to rule your own life, sure, but it operates in a world full of inherent inequality. Understanding how the law tries to bridge that gap? Well, that's the real key to understanding your rights. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the frameworks that shape your world.